With just 28 days to go until Election Day, new polls show a widening gap between him and Joe Biden.
We are 4 weeks to Election Day, and how he sees things is, well, very different than how most voters here in the United States see them.
Plus, voters are sending Mr. Trump a clear message just 4 weeks until Election Day, as another poll shows Joe Biden with a growing double-digit lead.
As of Tuesday, we are exactly 4 weeks away from Election Day. Millions have already voted around the country in person or through mail-in voting. 2020 has been just a wild year, with politics in this election at the center of almost everything: a pandemic, a reckoning with racism in the country, and a recession where millions have lost their jobs. It's felt like constant chaos. But one thing has remained the same throughout all of that chaos. President Trump has continued to trail Joe Biden in both national and battleground state polling. Elections are referendums on the incumbents, and the view of how President Trump has handled this year is, well, it's been poor. And the fall was supposed to be where the president turned it all around. A raucous convention with lots of people, which was pared down at the last minute, a quickly rebounding economy, which hasn't happened, and then the president contracted the virus he has desperately tried to put behind him.
4 more weeks, exactly, today.
Who's counting? But who's counting?
So I called up Alex Eisenstadt, who covers the Trump campaign for us, to see what's going on with the president's campaign.
We had the RNC. They saw the debates as a place where he could, show up and show out. And when he could have all these events, but it doesn't seem like that's what's going on.
No, it doesn't. And if you look at the sort of overarching span of this year, it's been a very turbulent year for America. From the perspective of polling and Trump's numbers in this race, the race has been remarkably stable. It's one of the few very stable, sort of consistent things that has happened this year. And so what has been interesting to see is that Trump has steadily remained behind in this race. He has not been able to close the gap. And now we're 4 weeks ahead of the election, and the Trump campaign has so far failed to find a way to crack Joe Biden's lead, which is, you're right, it's something that they wanted to really figure out how to do spring, summer, and then into the fall, just slowly chip away at that, and it just hasn't happened yet. But they've never really figured out a way to make it so that this race is anything but a referendum on the president. And 4 weeks out from the election, that's exactly what this is. This is essentially an up or down vote on Trump's leadership. Either you like him or you don't, and that's what the Trump campaign not wanted to happen, but instead it's what has happened.
How are Republicans feeling kind of writ large about this?
Yeah.
Do they feel like they're still in a fight to the finish, or are they kind of feeling kind of fatalistic at this?
What's interesting is that you speak to more and more people about this race, and more senior Republicans, and they'll start to tell you that this cake is kind of baked at this point. They haven't seen numbers move, and it's unclear what's going to make them move. I will tell you that talking to people on the Trump campaign, they insist that their numbers are closer. They insist that their private data is closer. But what you don't hear them predict necessarily is that he is necessarily going in the lead in this race, or is that he is necessarily in a position to win this race this close to the election.
So, toss out the polling. There are other things that we can use to explain to people where this election is, and that's like fundraising numbers, and more importantly, like how much money the Trump campaign has. So talk a little bit about that.
So it's fundraising that you want to look at, but it's also looking at sort of these early vote by mail numbers we're seeing, and the ballot request numbers, which is something that we've written about. Now, Democrats, if you look at polls, Democrats are much more likely to vote by mail than Republicans, but still there's alarm among Republicans that Democrats are banking a lot of votes at this early stage. And there's concern because do Republicans, are they going to be able necessarily to match that on election day? And so you can look at fundraising, that's one benchmark, and you can look at early voting, which is another benchmark.
How is fundraising working out for Republicans at this point, including the Trump campaign?
the Trump campaign for a long time had a massive financial edge over Democrats. The Trump campaign was tapping into Trump's incumbency. They were raising a massive amount of money. But what you've seen over the last 6 months is that fundraising lead has really entirely diminished. And if anything, it's Joe Biden now who heads into the final month of this race with a real edge in terms of how much money he has to spend. And you're seeing that being poured into advertising in battleground states.
This feels like a time where most campaigns would sit down with the candidate and say, sir, we need you to do this, or we need you to stop doing Y. I have an inkling that that's probably not the approach that you can take with President Trump.
It's often said that Trump is his own campaign manager, he's his own spokesman, he's his own chief of staff, and that's definitely the case. I can guarantee you that his performance in the debate was not what his advisors wanted him to do. That is not how they wanted him to act. That is not how they wanted him to behave. And if you look at some of the numbers that have come out since that debate, voters are registering their disapproval. He is running this campaign the way he wants to run it. Yes, there are advisors. Yes, there are people who are running his war room, who are running get out the vote efforts. And they do have a lot of ability to shape this race in terms of those kinds of tools and those kinds of things. But ultimately, it's the president who's going out there every day and communicating his message to voters.